purpose of today's meeting. As I mentioned, this is the first of two planned open houses as part of the growth management strategy exercise. So this study is really looking at the residential growth within King Township, as well as the population-related employment growth within the township as well. And we are also conducting an employment land strategy that's outside of this exercise, but both of which are part of the official plan process for King and inform growth management principles over the long-term horizon. And so today we have several themes we plan to explore. And we will, as Aloma said, have a kind of question and answer period between each phase. That way it's not just a large presentation followed by questions. So we really want to, have this dialogue throughout the presentation as we go along. So we're going to start with a work plan and timelines, then provide a little bit of growth context more regionally, look at some local trends in King, then taking a review of the King Township growth outlook, largely from what's been identified through the York Region Municipal Comprehensive Review process. So just summarizing those findings, and then getting into a bit more of a refined look at the growth by each settlement area. And then finally, we'll have a next step section. And so, as I mentioned, we are part of Watson and Associates. We are the consultant team hired to conduct both the growth management and the employment land strategy exercise. My name is Adam Fisher, and I'm a manager at Watson, and I'm the project manager of this study. And I'm joined by Jamie Cook, who's a managing partner at Watson and an advisor on this study, as well as Shayla Teku, who's a consultant and working as a project coordinator for this exercise. And I'll pass it over to Kristen for the township team.
Thank you, Adam. And again, thank you everyone for joining us virtually this evening for the open house. Our growth management strategy is really a foundational review that will help inform our official plan moving forward. And we're looking forward to hearing from you as this project advances. I'm pleased to introduce our project team, but maybe before I do that this evening, I just wanted to acknowledge that on the call, we do have Mayor Pellegrini, as well as Councillors Eat, Councillor Asselstein, Councillor Anstey, and Councillor Boyd joining us. So thank you, members of council who were able to join us. So in terms of the project team for the township, the policy planning team is leading this growth management strategy as well as the official plan review. And that team consists of myself. So I'm Kristen Harrison. I'm the manager of policy planning. I'm joined with Ms. Aloma Dreyer, who you heard from earlier on the WebEx details. She's a senior policy planner with the township. And we also have Isabella Baldessera, and she's a planner one with our policy team. And so key support for our project and guidance is being provided by Mr. Stephen Naylor, who's the Director of Growth Management Services, and he oversees the planning division in addition to building, bylaw, and development engineering. And the project team also benefits from key support and input from Gaspar Otaka, who is the manager of planning and development. And Gaspar's team leads the review of planning applications under the Planning Act and proposals on behalf of the township, and is vital to all things development and growth management strategy. So thank you for that slide, Adam, if we can just turn to the next one. So we just wanted to provide a little bit of context and overview to the official plan review and kind of where we are at in our work plan and how this growth management strategy really fits in. So phase one of our project consisted of our project initiation, where we had a draft discussion paper that went to council in September of 2023. We had a special meeting of council and working through the procurement process around some of the background work and now into the official plan. We're currently in phase two, where we are undertaking the growth management strategy and the employment land strategy. There'll be public consultation throughout this phase, and we're really looking to wrap this phase up by the end of this year with some directions reports to council to kind of get that understanding of how much growth and where will that growth be directed in the township moving forward through the future phases of our official plan review. Phase three will consist of we're calling it community, and really it'll be focusing on developing policies and land use designations to support complete communities and exploring key topic areas like housing and affordability, economic development and employment, community identity, sustainable design and community resiliency, cultural heritage, and parkland will also form parts of that. We're also looking at policies to protect what matters in the township, including supporting the agricultural and rural lands, our countryside and our natural heritage system and its features. And phase 3 will be taking place in the latter half of this year, concurrent with phase 2 work, and will also include a number of public engagement opportunities. Phase 4 of the project will be taking place next year in 2025. Will include draft amendments and some additional public consultation and statutory public meetings. And in phase 5, we're anticipating to take place from June to September 2025, and that'll include the adoption of the official plan amendments or amendment, as the case may be, and the approval process. And if we can turn to the next slide. I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of how the official plan works in with kind of our overall work plan and other projects happening at the township. So we have our official plan review on growing, and the growth management strategy and employment land strategy will help to feed into work that's being done in our public works and community services divisions with the transportation and water and wastewater master plans and the parks master plan. And all of that work really feeds into our development charges bylaw and our development charges background study. Next slide, please. So in terms of the approval process for the township's official plan, we do know that York Region is preparing to become a regional municipality without planning responsibilities. And Bill 185, that's proposed at this time, looks at this occurring on July 1st of this year. So if that legislation is passed by the province, then the minister will become the approval authority for the King OP or the King OP amendments. And that responsibility is currently held with York Region, but is moving to the minister. And York Region has offered assistance to local municipalities with respect to planning matters, including integrating the relevant policies from the York Region official plan that was developed and approved in 2022 into the King OP. And with that little bit of background out of the way, I'll turn it back over to Adam, who will walk through the project scope and purpose.
Thank you. So as part of the GMS here, we've laid out a few foundational bullets of really what this is trying to achieve. And that's really the intent in part for today's meeting, not only to solicit feedback, but to provide an overview of what this study intends to do. So we're not coming forward with any recommendations or findings in today's presentation, but really just setting that stage for future work and future presentations. And so a goal of the growth management strategy is really to establish growth management principles and identify opportunities and options to consider for accommodating growth within the planning horizon. And in this case, that's 2051. And foundationally, this is to ensure that King Township continues to plan for growth that's efficient over the long term, and it's necessary to study the current population, housing, employment, and economic demands that drive that growth. And as Krista mentioned, the township has initiated this official plan review process. And so, of course, this growth management strategy functions within that broader context. And it will be really a foundational document to the township's official plan, really in assessing that residential growth, density patterns, land needs, and non-residential growth, again, from a population-related standpoint. And lastly, the GMS will also provide strategic policy planning direction within the context of both the slide that Kristen just spoke to in the context of a changing York Region landscape, as well as a changing provincial policy framework. And we'll spend a little bit of time on that in a future slide. But suffice to say that through this work, we're not writing new policy, but really just providing direction for where that policy might go through the official plan process. And really to dig into this from a more technical standpoint, we've laid out here the main buckets of work through this GMS exercise that we will be undertaking over the course of 2024. So first and foremost, as you can see here, we're going to develop a strategy to accommodate the projected 2051 population, housing, and employment growth identified for King through that York Region official plan. We will be assessing the timing of that growth, but ultimately we are moving forward with that 2051 number identified by the region. Second, we will be reviewing the township's current residential land supply to accommodate growth, particularly the urban residential land supply within the villages of Schomberg, Nobleton, and King City. And while we're focusing on those areas, we will also be looking at growth within the rural and hamlet areas. But certainly the village growth is a focus within this exercise, as that provincial policy context emphasizes the need to identify and promote growth within urban locations or urban service locations. And as part of that, we will be assessing the intensification targets, as well as the designated greenfield area targets identified by York Region for King. So we'll be looking at those opportunities that exist within existing built areas for intensification, and also looking at growth within designated greenfield areas that are either vacant or with active development applications on them. We'll be looking at the township's current population-related commercial land needs. And as I mentioned on the last slide, we'll also be providing recommendations and actions to address near and long-term opportunities and challenges as they relate to policy. And so from a timeline perspective, you can see we kicked this study off approximately at the end of March, and we're now today on that orange slide with our first public open house. We are looking to provide a memo with the initial findings of phase 1 related to the growth forecast by village and corresponding land needs. And with that memo put forward in June, we also are aiming to present those initial findings to council before the summer as well. And then over the course of the summer, we would then be conducting some additional technical analysis to then bring forward a presentation to the public open house in September for a second meeting with this group. And from there, we'd then look to take that feedback and finalize the technical analysis and put it together in a report for November, present those findings to council for endorsement, and then look to finalize the report and the study by December of 2024. And with that, we thought we'd pause just for any comments or questions related to those previous slides. I guess Aloma, I'll hand it over to you in case I can't see anything through my presenter screen right now, so I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Adam. There's nothing in the chat yet, and I don't see any hands raised, so I think we're good to continue at this time.
Okay, thank you. So moving into the next section on growth context. So we've spent a little bit of time discussing policy, and of course, Kristen spent some additional time regarding the York Region and those changes that are occurring and how that will influence the township's process. But beyond what's going on within York Region, there are other broader documents that this study is functioning within. So in Ontario, there is a document called the Provincial Policy Statement, as you can see, the leftmost document from 2020. And this really lays out the foundation for planning within the province. And since that release in 2020, there is a new proposed provincial planning statement that was released just a few weeks ago. It is still open for comment, but we do anticipate that there likely won't be many changes in the finalized document. So this exercise will certainly contemplate any additional changes made to that provincial planning context, but our initial review and scan of that document would suggest that it doesn't materially change the approach of this study, and certainly doesn't impact the the approach to the technical analysis. Certainly, we'll consider the provincial policy changes more particularly when we get into the policy recommendations, making sure that everything aligns with that new document. So that will certainly be an important consideration. And then lastly, you can see we have a picture of the growth plan here. And this was a document, or is and was a document that projected growth for many of the municipalities and upper tiers within the Golden Greater Horseshoe, so this includes the Greater Toronto Area and beyond, from the Niagara region to Durham region, for example. And so there are growth targets established through that document that York Region inevitably used as part of their municipal comprehensive review process. And so the proposed 2024 PPS is essentially moving away from that growth plan document and will function as a standalone policy document, that new PPS that is. But the growth forecasts that have been previously established through the growth plan still do have status as they've been adopted and through these comprehensive review processes across the growth plan or across the Golden Greater Horseshoe. So there still is some merit and value in understanding that document and ensuring some consistency with that as well. And so beyond that legislative reform, as you can see on the rightmost bubble here, there are of course many other factors that are influencing how we plan and how we grow in Ontario, and particularly within King Township. Changing demographics is of course a big consideration when we do many of these studies. The province is getting older. And with that older population, there comes significant implications on things such as municipal services and a wider range of housing for seniors. There's broader infrastructure considerations when it comes to the immigration of families and young children, and how those growth pressures impact neighborhood planning, municipal services, financing infrastructure, school board planning, and many of these other facets of the planning world that we deal with. And this, of course, is made more complicated with the economic uncertainties that we've been facing over the last several years. Of course, COVID-19 has created some quite volatile economic conditions and growth conditions across the province. And while the pandemic is in the rear view, there still are those lingering impacts from it, such as the inflation pressures that we're currently facing, as well as high interest rates. And of course, that leads to that third bubble there with housing availability and housing affordability. So as these economic uncertainties impact that, housing affordability is, of course, an increasingly greater concern for many families across the province and beyond. So having that range of housing type is important when we're discussing that affordability context as well. And here, just a slide to summarize some of the recent growth patterns that have been experienced across Ontario more broadly. As you can see here, we've broken Ontario out into 5 categories: near north, Eastern Ontario, the GGH Outer Ring, again, that Golden Greater Horseshoe, Southwestern Ontario in the purple, and then the GTHA in the dark blue. And really what you can see, each bubble summarizes the growth rates over the last 2 decades versus the growth rates that are forecast over the next 25 years. And for all of these regions, there is an increasing growth pressure compared to what's been historically achieved. So in the face of challenging challenges related to housing affordability and the delivery of infrastructure currently, we will continue to face these growth pressures under these forecasts, and ensuring that municipalities are well positioned to handle that growth is paramount to growth management planning and official plan review planning as well. However, as you can see, one thing to note here is the GTHA has the smallest gap, if you will, between these regions. So the growth rate that's forecast is quite high, similar to the others, but historically the GTHA has had quite a high of a growth rate at 1.4%. So less of a shift in that upward direction, but still an upward trajectory nonetheless. And then lastly, just to speak a little bit more broadly about the disruptors and agents of change, I just have a few examples here on the screen. Automation and AI, of course, is a hot topic these days, particularly in the AI world, and how that might influence the various industry sectors across the province and really across the world, and how will that ultimately have an impact on growth management and in planning for long-term housing growth. E-commerce, of course, how we shop for goods and services is evolving, which generates a lot more opportunities for the goods movement sector. And it does put a little bit of downward pressure on those traditional brick and mortar retailing. So how do municipalities, embrace that changing landscape? As I mentioned briefly, an aging population and an aging labor force, really driven by that baby boomer generation. As they move into the retirement age, that really starts to place downward pressure on the labor force growth potential, and that has broader implications on economic growth as that labor force pool starts to shrink and there's greater pressure within that retiree category. Globalization, of course, is not a new thing, but certainly continues to impact economic growth. This has been really concentrated with increasingly protectionist measures in US, UK, and China, and the supply chain challenges that really arose during the pandemic are shifting this narrative as we start to see a little bit of more reshoring, particularly in the EV space within Ontario. Virtual meetings, of course, hybrid work opportunities changes the way that people decide where to live based on their place of employment, and of course, housing prices consideration as part of that, and then how the gig economy is also impacting employment growth and the need for space to accommodate employment growth. So as these gig economy opportunities arise, there isn't necessarily a space need associated with that, but of course, planning for those changing economic factors are one of the many considerations as part of both a growth management and an employment land strategy exercise. So that's just a little bit of more broader context. Again, happy to pause if there's any questions or comments.
Hi, Adam. We do have a question in the chat. All right, so I'll read the first one. So the historical growth rate cited by Adam, is this the actual? I ask as historically the actual has been less than the forecasts.
That's correct. Yeah, so the historical is less than the forecast for each of these bubbles. The historical is from 2001 to 2021, and then the forecast is the next 25 years. And yeah, as you can see, the historical is less than each of those forecasts.
And then there's one comment, which just notes that demographics is also changing in King as the population is more diverse and lower birth rates, and also more multi-generational homes.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's something we would definitely consider when we're doing this analysis.
And there's, sorry, go ahead, Kristen.
I was just going to add, Adam, just to clarify on the historical growth rate, is that based on census data from?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so that is the actual historical. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry if I missed that part of the question.
Thank you. And there's no hands raised. So, and there's nothing else. Oh, there is one more question. Two more questions have just come into the chat. Does Bill 185 change anything in the approval process? Is the first question.
I don't know if Kristen, that's one you want to tackle, or?
Certainly can try. So Bill 185 has a number of changes, and we'll see where it ends up at the end of the day. Before, like at this point, it's still just proposed and is subject to change before being passed, or if it is passed by the government. So Bill 185, in terms of our approval process of ROP, we talked about it a little bit earlier, that York Region will become a planning, an upper tier without planning responsibilities. So that's proposed in the legislation as of July 1st. And then also in there, there's a proposal that no third-party appeals to official plans and official plan amendments. So that would potentially impact our process as well. With the minister becoming the approval authority, the minister's decision is not appealable. So those are a couple things that would impact. Aloma, can you think of anything else?
No, I think you've covered all the key points.
The public process will remain the same. There's still a statutory public meeting required. There's still, we go above and beyond in our process to ensure that we get public consultation throughout the official plan review. So not just at those statutory requirements, but above and beyond that. We're touching base throughout the project.
Okay, and the last question is, at this point, is can you provide an update on the status of the Employment Lands Needs Study and its relationship to this work?
Yeah, absolutely. We are planning to jointly provide that phase 1 memo for the employment land strategy, or the employment strategy, I should say, and jointly present that to council in June. So both studies are on the same trajectory in that regard.
Thanks, Adam. And I don't see any other hands or questions at this time, so I think we're good to continue.
Sounds good. So our third section for today is just a little bit more data on local trends to kind of contextualize again this exercise moving forward. I know sometimes this data seems a bit weedy, but it's certainly something that we look at and consider, particularly as we start a study. We find this information helpful to discuss. And so this slide here is similar to what we've been discussing earlier, but now starting to put a little bit more focus on York Region itself here. So as you can see, we've got many of the census divisions across the GGH and surrounding York Region. And as you can see, York is in the rightmost column there with the highest annual growth rate over the last 2 decades in the dark blue at 2.3%. So really has been a strong driver of growth over the last 2 decades compared to the surrounding area. But as you can see, in the most recent 5-year period, the growth rate has dropped quite a bit to 1.1%. And that's not a phenomenon necessarily unique to York. As you can see, many of the GTA upper tier municipalities have faced a similar downward trajectory when it comes to those growth rates. And when you look to the leftmost side of this figure, you can see that the census divisions on the outer ring of the Golden Greater Horseshoe, so really beyond that GTHA, have started to experience a reversal of that trend, where those growth rates over the two decades have been a little bit less pronounced, but over the last 5 years, they've really seen a shift upwards. And of course, this has largely been driven by a lot of outward migration from the GTA into these surrounding communities, and that being, in part driven by the pandemic, remote work opportunities, and largely housing affordability. And so when we take a closer look at what's been happening in York Region, we typically like to look at the 3 components, or the 3 main components, if you will, of factors that drive growth. And so we've got all 3 here on the screen. So first is international migration. That's in the light blue. So that's, of course, from when an individual migrates from outside of Canada and they directly move to York Region through that process. There's inter-provincial migration, which you can't see on the screen really at all here. And that represents individuals migrating from one province to another. And then lastly, there's intra-provincial migration, which is individuals moving from one location in Ontario to another location. So really what jumps off the page here is particularly that intra-provincial migration category. And so you can see from 2001 to 2011, intra-provincial migration was a significant source of growth for York Region, which means there was a lot of individuals moving from elsewhere in the province to the region. And as we can see in the latest decade, from 11 to 2022, there has essentially been no intra-provincial migration. So whatever gains have been made by individuals migrating into York Region from other areas in the province has been essentially negated through individuals leaving York Region to locate to another area in the province. And so really growth over the last decade has been driven by that international migration component. As you can see, that has been increasing, of course, but certainly important to understand how that growth has been obtained and achieved over the last decade. But interestingly, when we look to the township or King Township, you can see a bit of a reversal of that pattern. So York Region, starting to slow down in the last two census periods of the last decade. But when we look at the King's Township trajectory, you can see from 2001 to 2011, growth was stable, but somewhat slow, if you will, at a growth rate of 0.9% and 0.2% over those periods. But really after 2011, growth did start to shift quite dramatically within the township, increasing at a growth rate of 4.3% between 11 and 16, and then a growth rate of 2.2% between 16 to 21. So quite significant growth rates over the last decade. Of course, they have started to decline a little bit from that peak in 2011 to 2016, but that is an extremely high growth rate that we don't often see from a prolonged standpoint. And when we then look at the growth forecast established for King Township through the York Region MCR process, it does indicate a growth rate of approximately 2% between 2021 and 2051. So over the next 3 decades, the region, through their work, has been projecting a pretty similar growth rate to what was observed over the last 5 years. And we'll spend a little bit more time in the later slides on that, those York Region forecast numbers. And then lastly, just to provide one final slide here on the local context, we have the historical building permit activity for King Township. And what you can really see here is actually a dramatic shift from 2014 to 2016 and to a certain extent 2017 saw quite a high level of building permit activity, largely within the low density household category, which is singles and semi-detached. We did see a little bit of medium density growth during that time period, and medium density includes townhomes and apartments and duplexes. And really, apartment growth started to arise largely in 2022, as you can see, a significant amount of apartment growth during that year, really driving the permit activity. And high density, for the context of this study, largely is those apartment categories, but it also does include stacked townhomes and secondary units. And we can discuss that in more detail if required, but we categorize secondary units as high density just because their occupancy patterns are more similar to an apartment than a single detached home. So the average number of people observed in those units is more similar to an apartment. And so as you can see, during the pandemic, of course, growth did start to ramp up again. We did see a bit of a slowdown in 2023. That isn't necessarily unique to King Township. A lot of municipalities across the province we've been working in have seen that slowdown in 2023, in part driven by inflation, interest rates, and low take-up within the housing sector. And from a mix perspective, I kind of touched on it already, but you can see on those bubbles on the right, from 2014 to 2019, largely low density housing growth. But in the most recent 2016 to 2023 period, you see a bit more of a distribution of housing types. And that really carries forward in the forecast from York Region, which again, we'll touch on in a few minutes here. And with that, we can pause again for any questions on that local context.
Okay, so we do have a few questions in the chat again. So the first was, is this process being considered through a lens of community? Can you hear me okay?
That's better now.
Okay. Do you want me to repeat the question?
If you could, thanks.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that. So is this process being considered through a lens of complete communities?
Yeah, absolutely. And whenever it comes to planning for growth, we're not looking to promote a bedroom community or one certain kind of community. You want to encourage a wide range of uses within each village across the township to ensure that there is that sense of a complete community within smaller areas, and whether that be a range of commercial uses close to residential uses, or having job opportunities within the employment lands across the township within, somewhat close vicinity. So ensuring that, all of these considerations are planned for is I think fundamental to a growth management exercise. But Kristen, I don't know if you have anything more locally you want to add to that, but.
No, just that certainly it will be taken into consideration. This work is kind of building on the how much and when in the time horizon that the growth is going to occur. And in our next phase of the official plan review, we'll be really focusing in on how to build that out as a complete community in the township. So certainly lots more to come on how this will translate into complete communities for the township, certainly.
Okay, and then next was, as we do the official plan review for King, are there stats on the number of people coming from the rest of York Region into King?
So I can start to speak to that. What we have at our firm is data from one census division to another. I don't believe StatsCan publishes any information regarding the migration patterns within census divisions, but I'm not sure if anyone at the township has some more local data. But I believe those are limitations through StatsCan.
No, we don't have any additional data on that.
Okay, there's a few additional questions that just came in. So let me just make them a little bit larger so I can read them. All right. So while interesting to see that York Region numbers for population, King Township is 1% of the regional population while having some 20% of the regional landmass. Growth rates in a small population are not significant unless concentrated in the two villages that are not trying to become complete communities. Our tax base is 97% residential and agricultural. Doesn't help a lot unless there is more intensification. I think it's more of a comment. Adam, I'm not sure if you have anything to say to that. Otherwise, I can move to the next question.
No, nothing to add.
Okay. So in the last chart, would a new condo building represent one building permit? The chart shows 370 high density in 2022. Is this 370 units or individual permits?
This would be 370 units. They're not all part of that high density category. It looks like there's about 75 low and medium. So we'd be looking at about 300 units within, I'm not sure how many buildings were issued during that period, but I would imagine it might be more than one. But yeah, that would represent the number of units.
Okay. And then we have one final question at this point, which is, will youth be meaningfully included in the design and engagement process of the growth strategy and the official plan review?
Yep, certainly. I'm happy to take that one. Yes, definitely. We'll be reaching out to a broad range of people to get a variety of perspectives. So certainly youth are on our radar as well. So through opportunities like this, as well as other engagement opportunities that we're looking at building into our work program throughout the official plan review, we'll be seeking those opinions.
Thanks, Kristen. So we did just get two last questions come in, and I think we're on time. So I'll go through these two questions and then we'll move on to the next section, if that's okay, Adam.
Sounds great.
Okay, so the first one was, will you be using the Connect on economic development tool?
Not sure if that's a question for Chris, but I'm not entirely familiar with that tool. So we'd have to look into that.
Okay. And then the last is, in growing King Township from 25,000 residents to 66,000 residents by 2050, why is so little growth being allocated to Schaumburg and Lloydtown?
That's certainly something we're going to assess through this process. Not fundamentally aware of those specific nuances from York Region, but we're going to be assessing those growth allocations through this exercise through our own lens. So that's something we're looking at through this phase 1 piece for sure.
Okay, and that looks like all the questions, and I don't see any hands raised, so we're good to move on to the next section.
Okay, so this section here is the King Township Growth Outlook. So the metrics that you'll largely see on this slide represent the numbers that have been put forward through the York Region MCR. These are the numbers to somewhat muddy the waters here, but these were the numbers that were put forward to the province before they made their modifications. So with the recent changes regarding the Greenbelt, we were working back with those numbers from, I believe it was July of 2022. So the numbers you see on the screen will reflect that. So as one commenter noted, of course, King is a small component of the region itself, but that's not to say that the growth that is facing the township is not. It's certainly significant. The population growth represents 3% of that regional growth outlook, and the employment represents 2%. And then, as you can see in the bottom left, it represents 22,500 new people over the 30-year horizon, which is 750 new individuals annually, and 6,600 jobs over that forecast period, which is 220 jobs annually. And again, as one commenter noted, to achieve that level of growth, it certainly requires a lot of intensification. So York Region has identified an intensification forecast of 4,400 units over that 30-year period, which represents just over half of that housing forecast. So intensification is most definitely a huge consideration when it comes to accommodating growth in King, and that's something we're going to be spending a lot of time at looking at through this study to determine whether this target is appropriate, and if we think there's merit in assessing an alternative intensification target over the forecast. On the right here, we have the employment activity rate, and we're just highlighting this to show that it is anticipated to come down over the forecast period. And an activity rate is the ratio of jobs to people. And so when an activity rate comes down, that's largely speaking to kind of two larger phenomenons, if you will. One is that aging of the population. So as the baby boomer generation ages, they leave the labor force, and so those participation rate or those employment activity rates can start to decline. But second to that, and largely impacting this, is that population is expected to grow at a faster rate than employment. So as population grows faster than employment, you start to see that ratio, of course, decline. And then lastly, through that York Region MCR, they have not identified any settlement area boundary expansion for community area growth, which community area represents residential development as well as that population related employment. And they've also identified no employment area growth, which is typically it's the employment designation within King, and that would typically be your more industrial traditional employment uses. So the York MCR has not identified a settlement area boundary expansion through their exercise, but again, that's something that we'll be looking at through this work. And here we have the housing forecast established for King, again, through that York MCR. And the one reason that we highlight this to a certain extent is that growth is back-ended in this York Region forecast. So as you can see, we've summarized the growth in 10-year periods, and 2021 to about 2041 is pretty stable. And 41 to 51 sees a pretty significant jump in housing growth. And really that's even more pronounced when you look at it in 5-year increments, where a lot of growth is post 2046. So again, one of the things that we are examining through this exercise is the appropriateness of that forecast from a timing perspective. This approach put forward by York Region is in part, we think, of course, driven by infrastructure constraints that prolong the timing of growth. And so a fundamental goal of this growth management exercise is to ensure that the growth forecast that the township is planning towards is based on anticipated demand for growth, and that really the demand for that growth should drive the timing of infrastructure rather than the infrastructure timing the growth outlook. So again, something that we're going to be spending some time looking at. And this slide represents the housing forecast, both historically and through the York MCR. So as you can see in that left pie chart, we've got the housing growth by type over the last 15 years. Again, low density is singles and semis, medium densities, townhomes, apartments, and duplexes, and then high density is stacked townhomes and apartments, and secondary units would be a component of that now when we're talking about a forecast. And so when you look to the pie chart on the right, it's quite different. You can see that low density is forecast to represent about 1/3 of housing growth, which is certainly different from what's been observed historically. Medium density with a slight increase from 14 to 20%, and then really quite a substantial increase in that high density component of the forecast. So that York Region MCR is certainly putting forward a housing forecast oriented towards high density development. And when you're striving to achieve such a high intensification target, that of course makes sense, as those intensification opportunities typically are facilitated by high density development. But again, this is something we are looking at through phase one to determine, not only the intensification target, the timing of growth, but also how that growth is achieved from a mixed perspective, and ensuring that that fit makes sense. And so, again, one of the things we'll be looking at through this exercise. And then, as you can see on the rightmost square there, that housing growth activity from an annual perspective is quite high compared to historical trends as well. Nearly 100 more units a year in the forecast than what's been done historically. And sorry, one last point to make on this one is that when we're talking about high density, it does represent for apartments 3 to 6 stories within King. And so this slide we bring up to again emphasize that this growth management exercise is most definitely considerate of the growth across the entire township. But when we're working within this provincial planning context that directs growth to urban systems, we really are spending a lot of focus on the urban system within King, which would represent the 3 villages of Schomberg and Nobleton and King City. So we are certainly looking at intensification, greenfield densities, land requirements, and many of those other considerations within the villages at a more granular level. And then, of course, also looking at a growth allocation to the remaining area as a combined total. And just one last slide on that urban structure. So we've included this just to further break down the structure of the villages here. So you can see the blue, which represents the built-up area, which was established in 2006. And then we have the designated greenfield area in the orange hatching. And so the York Region official plan requires that the orange areas meet a minimum of 30 residents and jobs per hectare. And then if there are any new community areas, they would be required to meet 65 residents and jobs per hectare. However, a lower density target of 50 can be requested in certain circumstances. And with that changing landscape of York Region no longer having planning authority, that will provide the township with more autonomy to look at those densities, as 65 is typically associated with more high order transit opportunities and those more walkable environments. And without those transit opportunities, densities such as that can be potentially difficult to achieve. But nonetheless, again, one of those things that we'll be looking at through this exercise as we move through everything. And lastly, again, just to reiterate, the intensification target of 54% or 4,400 units would have to be achieved within those blue areas and the built-up area. And that concludes the section there.
Thanks, Adam. We have a number of questions that have come in. there's a few related to village boundary expansions. So there's a few individuals who've asked, will consideration be given to expanding village boundaries? And are there any opportunities for planning area boundaries or existing urban area boundaries to be expanded through this review?
Do you want me to start, Kristen, or would you prefer?
You can start, I can add.
Okay. Yeah, we'll through this exercise, as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the various, levers of growth, if you will. So that's the timing of growth, the intensification targets, the greenfield targets, uh, and the forecast by village, the housing forecast mix, and all of those things together will ultimately land at a land needs analysis to determine whether or not there's sufficient urban land to accommodate long-term growth. And of course, if the results of that indicate no, then there would be a discussion around that. But that's something again that we don't know through our exercise now. York Region identified zero expansion, but we'll be looking at that through our work.
Yeah, just to add, again, just early in the process to know whether that's something that's necessary at this point. So, as Adam said, we'll continue to review it and continue to report back on that as our work continues.
Sorry. So there's also a few questions related to employment, including, can we please define employment? Would this include working at home, home businesses, workers in the Holland Marsh? And would it be full-time employment types, or is this including part-time and seasonal workers?
Yeah, good question. So employment within the context of this exercise aligns with how Stats Canada defines employment, which, for example, hybrid workers, or sorry, let me start with full work from home is certainly an employment category that we look at. That is based on where the individual lives, that work at home metric. We will look at no fixed place of work, so those that don't have an office or standard place that they go to every day, such as construction worker. Again, they're not necessarily driving land, but they are a component of that employment growth forecast. There's hybrid remote work where an individual may work within an office in King Township or perhaps somewhere else in York Region. They may work from home a few days a week, but according to the Statistics Canada definition, they would not be considered a work from home employee, and their employment would be based on where that job is located, not where the individual works from or individual lives. I'm sorry, and then of course commercial, industrial, institutional, those more traditional uses that have an impact on land. Again, big component of that forecast that we'll be looking at.
Thank you. So the next question is, does the growth management strategy provide opportunities for individuals wanting to subdivide their own properties?
I can take that one if you'd
Yeah,
like,
sure.
Adam. Yeah,
Thanks.
that's something that we'll need to
Yeah.
consider, not just through the growth management strategy, but also through the official plan review in general. So we have quite restrictive policies within our existing residential areas around lot creation. Lot creation within villages is an opportunity to provide potentially some intensification. So it's something that we'll be reviewing fulsomely. Out in the protected countryside or out in the rural areas of the township, we're really restricted on lot creation for residential purposes because of the Greenbelt Plan and the Oak Ridges Marine Conservation Plan. So there is some provincial policy and direction on lot creation out in those outside of villages that we need to be mindful of when we're developing the official plan policies. And I'm not sure if Gaspar, if you had anything to add there, I saw your camera come on.
You're on mute. We can't
still
hear
can't
you,
hear you.
Gaspar. Yeah. guess you're not on mute, but yeah, your mic's not working.
Yeah, I think we're okay. Okay to continue.
Okay. So the next question was growth in housing. Is it to be multi-residential instead of ground-oriented housing because of land costs inherent in the area? Will regional trends on multi-residential units be seen in King Township to satisfy intensification?
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yep.
Sorry.
So growth in housing, is it to be multi-residential versus ground-oriented housing because of land costs inherent in the area? Will the regional trends on multi-unit residential developments be seen in King Township to satisfy intensification?
Got it. Yeah, I mean, that's something that we're, again, it's unfortunate that, not unfortunate, like the intent for today is really just to provide an introduction to the study. So we don't have all the answers yet. But with that being said, yeah, we're definitely gonna look at the mix and determine that high density component of the forecast. And yeah, as you mentioned, that's in part driven by housing affordability concerns, and that's not just a regional consideration, but how is that different from the region as a whole versus the township, and what are those differences? What would they indicate from a demand perspective? And then there's also the consideration of land constraints with King having a lot of greenbelt area and not a lot of opportunity left for those ground-oriented dwellings, and essentially driving that need for higher density housing types as well. So not only affordability, but also the various ground factors that exist today.
Thanks, Adam. There's another question relating, well, the last two both relate to intensification. So the first one asks if intensification will be occurring only within the current designated areas. Is there a potential to expand where intensification can occur, notwithstanding any potential boundary expansion?
No, for this, intensification would be defined as that built boundary. Let me bring that up. So that was established in 2006 through the growth plan. And so when intensification is measured, it is in the Golden Greater Horseshoe, it is measured based on those built-up areas as you see on the screen there. So it's really looking to drive growth within to those existing areas. So that would be the focus of our exercise when it comes to intensification.
And I think just to add to that, I think in a couple of slides, we'll get to our land use schedules of King City, Nobleton, and Schaumburg. And perhaps within that built boundary, there may be opportunities to look at expanding our core area or mixed use area, or identifying opportunities for additional intensification where we don't permit it today, or as the case may be. So that's something that we'll definitely be reviewing through the fulsome official plan review within that blue area as Adam has identified.
Thanks, Adam and Kristen. And the last question right now is the province is placing substantially greater focus on intensification, which has obvious character impacts on villages. How will this review implement the built form standards recently passed in the township's village urban design guidelines?
Yeah, I can start on that at high level. We'll definitely consider those constraints when we look at so the growth management exercise is sometimes in nature a bit higher level, and then as the official plan process continues, it goes into more details. So when we're looking at those land needs and the housing mix, we're considerate of those restrictions from a zoning perspective or a height perspective, and that would have implications on the density targets that drive our land needs calculation. But from the growth management strategy exercise, I think that's as far as we would really take that, perhaps look at that from a policy recommendation standpoint, but that might get more into the official plan generally. So I'll pass that over to Kristen if you want to add anything.
Yeah, so just to add, so intensification really does allow us to optimize infrastructure and the use of lands within our community, and they can really help contribute to a more vibrant community and sense of place. The official plan as it works today really directs intensification in a way that achieves other important planning objectives. So it we're looking at ensuring that there's compatibility with maintaining the character of areas, maintaining mature vegetation and that small town feel in our villages, and distinctive neighborhoods. So it's certainly something that we'll be taking into consideration when we're looking at any sort of updates or revisions to our policies. We'll be looking for a balanced approach to intensification.
Okay, I don't see any other questions and there's no hands raised, so I think we're good to
Loma,
continue.
can you hear me?
Yes.
There we go. Sorry. I apologize to everybody. I don't know what was going on with my audio. I just to back up a couple questions. I was just saying, Kristen, you covered it all. I was going to jump in, but you covered it fine. So I have nothing else to add now that you can hear me.
Thanks, Caspar.
Yeah.
Okay, still good, Aloma? Perfect. Okay, the last section here, or second to last, I should say, is now really getting into the King Township growth by settlement area. And so we have a few more slides going through that. So this here is a summary of the units in the development approvals process by village. So a few things to see here. You can see that King City certainly has the largest share of the development applications that are active within the township at nearly or just over 2/3, and at 2,800 units. Nobleton representing about 1/3 of the remaining units in the development approvals process, and then Schaumburg with about 100 units in that process. So, I think Kristen will speak to this in a little bit more detail on the coming slides, but when we look at King City, for example, these development applications really represent the remaining land area in the village. So while they are active development applications, they are still a part of that growth forecast. So all of the township-wide growth that's projected through that York MCR process, these development applications definitely are a significant component of achieving that growth. And as you can see, there's about 4,200 units identified in approvals process right now. And then secondly, intensification, definitely spent a lot of time on that or discussing that so far today. But as you can see, we've summarized here based on the township's data, the number of units in application related to intensification, and then more broadly, the potential for intensification based on broader opportunities. And we'll be taking a closer look at that intensification potential category through this exercise. But for now, at a high level, this results in about 4,600 units in that intensification potential overall, which does exceed the intensification forecast from York Region. However, it is important to note that only 26% of this potential is in applications right now. So there is a lot of units that have to be fulfilled within this broader intensification potential category, and that can be difficult depending on the current use and desirability and infrastructure and all the other considerations that go into facilitating intensification. So we want to ensure that as we do this exercise, that these units and locations with potential for intensification can be reasonably planned for in the next 30 years to not over or understate the intensification forecast for the township. And then off to the right, you can see lastly, just that King City again represents the largest share of this potential, with Nobleton and Schaumburg relatively dispersed with the remaining third of that potential. And so with that, I'm going to pass the next few slides over to Kristen to wrap up this section.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, so on the screen, we have the Schedule D1 to the current official plan for King, and that's the Village of King City Land Use Designation Schedule. And we just wanted to kind of draw your attention to this schedule and identify those dark yellow areas are established neighborhoods. So under the Our King official plan, this designation primarily permits low density residential uses, including single detached dwellings. And those are really those neighborhoods that exist in King City today. And the lighter yellow area is what we've designated as neighborhood. And that designation really provides for new housing opportunities for the township to meet its projected housing needs. So right now, there are a number of development applications ongoing, active, or approved on those lands that are identified in light yellow. There's very few parcels of land left that don't have development applications either active or approved. So really what we're seeing here is that a lot of that greenfield or designated greenfield development is already in process in the township. And that, as Adam noted, that type of growth will contribute to meeting our 2051 population targets. So in terms of intensification, the area, our core area designation, which is shown in a peach color, kind of central to King Road and Keel Street, provides for mixed use as well as intensification opportunities. We have a transit station area that is designated in dark purple, and that's around the King City GO station, and it also allows for some intensification opportunities. And we also have a light pink designation, which is a mixed use area designation. And it also allows for some opportunities for intensification there. So that's primarily at today's day where we focus that intensification and where we've identified that we either have development applications in the approval process or where there's potential for intensification. And so those areas are really driving our ability to meet the intensification targets that have been outlined. And as Adam noted, we'll continue to take a look at that and drill down a little bit deeper to see whether we need to accommodate any additional intensification through other areas within the built boundary. And that'll happen as the official plan review progresses. So also on this schedule, you'll note, so there's that 28, oh, sorry, Adam, just back one. So there's 2,800 units currently in development approval process. And then this is identifying that there's another 2,210 units of additional intensification potential that we've identified within this existing land use framework that we have today. And so now we can move on to Nobleton here. Thank you. So similar to King City, in Nobleton, that dark yellow designation is identifying the established neighborhoods, which really permit those single detached dwellings, and they're primarily existing single detached dwellings in these areas. The light yellow are areas where it's designated for neighborhoods. So that's really, again, where we have our designated greenfield areas that provide for those new housing opportunities that are meeting our population needs. Some of them have built out. So at the northeast there is a neighborhood where you can see the lot fabric that has already been built out. But the ones that are just yellow without a lot fabric on them, there are active development applications that will help contribute to our growth needs to 2051. And then there's opportunities for potential intensification within the core area in peach and the mixed use area that's also shown in light pink on the schedule. And on the right-hand side of the screen, it's noting that there are 1,290 units of development approvals in process, and then an additional 570 additional intensification units that we've identified as potential within this land use framework. And in Schaumburg, similar story, that dark yellow again refers to the established neighborhood that permits single detached homes. The light yellow is our neighborhood area, and with Schaumburg, you can see that there's really very minimal lands that are designated for that greenfield development. So there's not a ton of growth that was attributed to Nobleton, or sorry, not Nobleton, Schaumburg. I think that there was a comment earlier that why isn't Nobleton, or sorry, I keep saying Nobleton, why isn't Schaumburg projected to grow? And really that's because the development, the existing development in the community is really out, almost out to the boundary of the village. So there's not a great deal of greenfield development to happen. And then intensification in Schaumburg is somewhat limited based on the special policy area that applies to the Main Street area. And really, because that area is susceptible to flooding, not a large amount of intensification is projected to go into that area. So in process right now, we have about 105 units of development. And then there's a potential for intensification up to 720 units that we've identified under this existing framework. And again, that we'll continue to review that as the official plan review continues.
All right. So we have a number of questions that have come into the chat. So to begin, will this exercise be taking into account the need for industrial growth to drive community growth and as employment is a major driver in developing residential needs?
Yeah, the employment land strategy will be focusing on that, and again, those two studies are happening congruently. So definitely having both sides of the equation, if you will, being focused on just in different streams. So this GMS doesn't specifically contemplate that, but the ELS we're conducting does.
Great, thank you. The next question was, will there be an in-person workshop or in-person forums to add input into the planning exercise?
Yeah, let me bring this up again. So correct me if I'm wrong, Kristen, but I believe the intent is for that September open house meeting to be in person. And so that is the planned opportunity for that. I don't believe we have any other major engagement pieces planned throughout the process other than that September open house.
Yes, for the growth management strategy, there will be that in-person open house in September. And then through the official plan review, we'll also be having some concurrent engagement opportunities, and a number of those will be scheduled to be in person as well.
Thank you. So the next question was, if I am correct, the township of King extends from Dufferin to Bathurst, yet the map has no details for that segment. Can you please explain in detail if there are any plans for that portion of the township?
I can
Yeah.
speak to that one. So yes, between Bathurst and Dufferin, that is part of the township. It is part of the rural area of the township, so it's outside a settlement area, and portions of that are located within the Oak Ridges Moraine, or majority of that is located within the Oak Ridges Moraine, from kind of just north of Highway 9 and south, or Davis Drive West, sorry, and south, and then north of that, it's located in the Greenbelt plan area. So it's outside a village, but definitely still part of the township.
Thanks, Kristen. So the next question was, are there any greenfield areas in King City that aren't subject to draft plan of subdivision applications?
And I may call on a friend here, but I believe that there's maybe 2 parcels left where we don't have an active development application, but they may be in for pre-consultation.
Yeah, sorry, I can jump. So, Kristen, just to make sure that the question was, are there any parcels that do not have subdivision applications?
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, the short answer is no, not really. There are a couple parcels at the east end of South Summit Farm Road that are, as you said, it's sort of the pre-consultation stage that we're anticipating applications, but that would be the only pocket that is designated neighborhood right now that does not currently have an actual application in. Everything else has been either draft approved or is actively moving towards registration, so is pretty much absorbed in either an approval or is sort of progressing rapidly towards the construction stage, except for that pocket at the south end, sorry, the east end of South Summit Farm Road, which is, I can't point on my screen here if somebody wants to point. It's down in the southwest quadrant of King City, just north of Collar Drive. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Right where the hand was, right there.
Great. The next question relates also to this slide, so we can keep it up. They apologize if they've missed it, but what is the site-specific policy area on the west side of King? Are those lands to be determined? Is there potential for high-density village-type uses?
And if that's referring to VSSPA 9, so that's located along King Road, south of James Street. The official plan identifies that a study will be undertaken to evaluate whether intensification is suitable in this area. So that's something that we're taking a look at through both this growth management strategy as well as the official plan review. So at the last official plan update, it was an area that was flagged or identified where there may be some potential for intensification. And so that's being explored a little bit more so through this process. The other village site-specific policy areas refer to specific policies in the official plan. VSSPA 6 and 7 are subdivisions that are in the or have approvals. VSSPA 4, which refers to the King's Cross area, has some just specific policies regarding lot area up there. So no, it doesn't refer to high density development. And I think that covers off most of them.
Thanks, Kristen. And you did answer a follow-up question as well that was looking at the other SSPA numbers. So thank you for that.
And just to add, sorry, Aloma, just to add,
Yeah.
if people are curious, our official plan is on our website, and all the policies that are specific to these numbers are identified in that official plan. So if you want to just email policyplanning@king.ca, we can certainly point you in the right direction so you can see what those policies state today.
Thanks, Kristen. So the next question is, what policies will be in place to ensure that new development is built to a high architectural standard?
And again, that's something that we'll continue to review throughout the process. So that's something that we welcome input and feedback on throughout the official plan review. So the growth management strategy won't be looking at developing policies specifically on urban design, but that will be part of the official plan review to the extent possible that we can.
And the next question sounds like it relates to another project that we have going on right now. Have community development permits been considered as an approval process for the villages?
And I can start on that one. So we have identified 2 areas where the township is looking to develop a community planning permit system, and they focus around the Doctors Lane and Old King Road areas in both King City and Nobleton. So we do have a project, an active project ongoing that's looking at those specific areas in developing neighborhood plans for them. So identifying some more development plans specific to those areas and developing a community planning permit system to help support their development. So that's an active and ongoing project that we have available on our speaking page. So that's speaking.king.ca. And there's a lot of project information there. And again, you can email policyplanning@king.ca and we can point you in the right direction to get you some information on community planning permit systems.
Thanks, Kristen. So there's a couple questions about how units are counted. So can you please clarify how we know the potential number of units, and how do new units being built under the new provincial rule that all lots can have 3 units, how is that being considered?
Do you want me to start on that one, Kristen?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll give consideration to that 3-unit consideration, but it's certainly not a significant number when it comes to the growth forecast. Sorry, Aloma, can you repeat the first part of that question again?
Yeah, it was, can you clarify how you know the number of potential units?
Right.
I
Yes, go ahead.
I don't know if you want me to add
Yeah,
there.
go ahead.
So the potential number of units is based off some information that the township put together, I believe, to date, if that's still correct, Adam. But it was based off of pre-consultation meetings that we've had and development proposals that have been floated past the township, but in a more formal manner. So we took a look at those proposals and identified how many units they could potentially support, and then also included some properties where we've projected a certain units per hectare where we thought that there might be a potential for a form of development based on our current OP policies. I'm not sure, Gaspar, if you have anything to add there.
No, only that as you said, the information was largely informed by real data in the sense, even though it was either informed by real data in the sense that actual formal applications that we've seen coming in, or very sort of high level or detailed level meetings and discussions with proponents for projects that are very tangible, if not yet formally submitted yet, but gives us a really good idea of what sort of projects are on the go or coming eventually. So we have a pretty good handle on terms of the like King City, for example. Most sites throughout the designated lands, we have a pretty good handle on what kinds of projects are being thought of on those lands. So it's based on real numbers.
Thank you. So the next question looks at servicing considerations. So will this exercise consider how servicing will progress in tandem with intensification?
Can start on that, and I think it gets back to an earlier point that I made, that we're not necessarily looking for infrastructure to drive the growth forecast. Really want that process to be driven by the township in looking at that growth demand. That's or in those 5-year increments over the 30-year horizon, and then in establishing that demand, ensuring that the infrastructure is in place to support that. So it's definitely an exercise that should be done in tandem, but we just want to ensure that through this work, it's not the reverse of infrastructure driving growth.
Thanks, Adam. So we do have a few questions about the lands east of Dufferin that are adjacent to King City. Can you confirm if the green protected areas adjacent to the King City Village Plan area east of Dufferin are intended to remain under the current land use, or are they, or is residential growth anticipated east of Dufferin in the foreseeable future, understanding that an urban boundary would need to be expanded?
I'm certainly happy to start on that one. So those lands adjacent to the King City boundary, east of Dufferin over towards Bathurst, are located in the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, and they're specifically identified in I believe, the Oak Ridges Moraine Natural Linkage Area. The provincial plan, so the Oak Ridges Moraine Conservation Plan, does not permit urban area boundary expansions into the Oak Ridges Moraine Natural Linkage Area. So based on the provincial plan, we will not be looking to extend the urban boundary of King City east of Dufferin.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. And there's looks like there's one last question at this time. So Lloydtown is significantly closer to the village of Schomberg than all the other hamlets are to built-up areas and functions as a neighborhood of Schomberg, but without access to clean water and sewers. Schomberg will expand right to Lloydtown with the Forest Brook Phase 2 development, but Lloydtown is being told that Schomberg does not have capacity for water or sewer expansion and is not on the planning horizon. What is being done to address the lack of water and sewer capacity, and what is being done to encourage infill and density in Lloydtown?
Okay, so I can start on that one as well. Lloydtown is a hamlet in the township. So although it is close to Schomberg, it's technically not identified as a village. So it has a different classification in the hierarchy of settlements. So being a hamlet, it is projected and to not to grow in the sense of like our villages are. So there may be minor incremental infilling on existing lots, but there's really not a lot of growth projected to go to hamlets. And hamlets are intended to remain on private services, so serviced by wells and septics. And there are provincial policy restrictions regarding extending municipal services to hamlets in order to keep their rural character.
I might just add to that, Kristen, as well. In the question, there was reference to Schomberg expanding to the edge of Lloydtown with the Forest Brook development. That's for those that don't know, that's the reference to some lands at the very southwest section of the existing urban boundary of Schomberg. And to be clear, there is no expansion of the urban boundary of Schomberg or the settlement boundary of Schomberg. That development is taking place within the confines of what the settlement boundary of Schomberg was. So there is no actual, although that development is now filling in an area that had not been developed before, there is no actual expansion of the boundary of Schomberg beyond what it's always been considered to be. So that's an important distinction in terms of what the Forest Brook Hills development is actually doing.
Thanks, Gaspar.
Thanks, Gaspar and Kristen. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions or hands raised, so I think we're good to move on.
Okay, we have one last slide then on next steps here, and quite similar to the schedule that we put forth earlier. So we are hoping to complete some technical findings in phase 1 for June with a memo that we'd then bring forward to council for some initial findings. As I mentioned in response to a previous comment, the idea would be that the phase 1 results of the employment strategy would occur in tandem with that. And then over the summer, we would look to complete some additional technical analysis and have that in-person meeting for the open house in September. And from there, look to finalize the technical analysis and write the report for November, and also go to council with the fully fledged phase 1 and phase 2 report for endorsement, and then barring any additional feedback, finalize that report within 2024 of December. So that is the trajectory for the GMS. The employment strategy is similar with a bit of a different engagement outlook, but those two will largely be targeting that same endpoint. And yeah, if there's any final comments or questions, happy to open it up. And if you need to contact the team, you can at policyplanning@king.ca or visit the link there to learn more.
Thanks, Adam. There's just a few comments or questions about whether or not individuals can sign up to a mailing list and if the presentation can be shared with those in attendance. So just to answer those questions, everyone who has attended tonight will be kept on the mailing list and will receive updates of the project as it moves forward. And the intent is to publish the slides and the presentation on the Speaking Project page following tonight's meeting, so later this week, and we'll send an email around to everyone who's registered once those materials are available online. But I don't see any other questions coming in right now. So if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat now, or you can email them to the policy planning team at policyplanning@king.ca. Otherwise, I think we're good.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks everyone for attending and for all the questions and participation. I think we'll hang on for a few more minutes just in case anyone's typing a question out that they just need a little bit more time, and the project team will stick around for a few more minutes.
All right, so one more question comment has come in regarding Lloydtown. That the lots in Lloydtown can easily accommodate additional soft density to meet the growing needs for housing by the province in a desirable, sustainable, and attractive manner, as it is a low carbon, walkable neighborhood. Car-centric suburban sprawl is easy, but in the era of climate change, it is not sustainable. Lloydtown is also falling into disrepair with aging septic systems and old wells, while greenfield areas are being developed.
Thank you for the comment. Was there a question in there? It was just a comment. Okay, comment. So we can take that back and take it into consideration.
Yep, but I'm not seeing anything else coming in through the chat. Okay, one more question. Would like to, or it's more of a comment maybe. So would like to stress the need for comprehensive understanding and input for balanced growth across the township that addresses the need for industrial growth as a driver for residential growth and a sense of community rather than just a bedroom community. Okay.
Thanks. And Aloma, are you able to get a transcript of the chat?
Yep, all questions and comments have been recorded and saved.
Great, thank you.
All right, so with that, I'm going to turn off the recording. I think we're good.
I see we have a few attendees still here. So